that family. So tonight, we've got Mr. Jeremy Donahoe who's going to be teaching, and I know he's excited, maybe a little nervous to do that, so would ask you, if you would, to give your attention to the lesson that he's prepared. Thank you.
Well, good evening. I do appreciate the opportunity that Adam has extended to me to teach with him on this, our study topic of the Son supremacy. I've enjoyed studying Hebrews over the last couple of weeks and looking at the book that Michael Whitworth wrote entitled The Son Supremacy. First, I am not a teacher, but rather a Bible student, and it is my prayer that as I direct our thoughts tonight in our study, that we all gain in our understanding, that we're strengthened in our faith, and it enables us to grow as a Christian. While I've prepared to discuss, certain things, please feel free to comment, as I know that we will all benefit, as I certainly do, with anything that you guys have to contribute with the lesson. And so, yeah. Is that the one from the flash drive, Eddie? Was it already up? Or did you open up another one? No, sir. There should be a one on the desktop. But while we're getting that pulled up, the Son supremacy, our theme for our study as we look at Hebrews, Adam laid out last week a great foundation that's introducing our study over the next however many lessons we take to kind of cover Hebrews. Our study quickly engages us in a thought of who Jesus is and how he is better. Truly, the Son supremacy. I must have copied over the wrong PowerPoint, so we may not have anything to look at tonight. But we're going to evaluate in our study several warnings that is captured in Hebrews, what we have access to.
Again, do you think you copied the wrong one, or did I put the wrong one?
No, I think I only had one PowerPoint on there, so I probably copied the wrong one over to it.
You using the same one from the original slide, or did you modify?
It has my name at the end of it. But we're going to evaluate several warnings, what we have access to through Christ, comparisons of people, covenants, to gain a deeper understanding and even appreciation of the covenant that we have through Christ. The idea of better, perfect, eternal is mentioned over and over and many times throughout Hebrews. And so, as we look at our study of Hebrews, I want us to think about this unknown author and who he's writing to. These Hebrews, specifically Jewish Christians, and what they were experiencing during this time period. Persecution unlike, we have ever experienced. And this is after the death and burial and resurrection of Christ, and even a generation past that point. So what is the purpose of Hebrews? So let's just open up our Bibles, and we're going to begin in Hebrews chapter 1, and we'll look at verses 1 through 4 beginning. God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in times past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the worlds, who being the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power, when he had by himself purged our sins, He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become so much better than the angels, as he has by inheritance obtained a more excellent name than they. You know, who has your ear? You know, with social media, with the various news outlets that we have, with Fox News, you know, or even our local WBBJ on Channel 7, you know, maybe there's some other news outlets, OAN, CNN even, with all the different podcasts that people engage themselves, or books, the various streaming services with Hulu, Netflix, you name it. And oftentimes we can all agree that we have plenty of these sources to listen to, and if we spend enough time engaging and listening to them, they impact how we think, they impact how we talk, and even how we behave. You know, you've witnessed those that spend a great deal of time maybe that listen and, you know, engross themselves with Fox News. It's apparent that that's the news outlet that they listen to, right? Because of the spin that they have on things. It's the narrative that I think kind of matches most, but that's just an opinion. But you can immediately tell, without them really even saying that they watch that various outlet, that that's the one that they listen to. If you're into the social media heavily and begin to discuss the latest trending reels, you can immediately tell that that person's, you know, up to snuff on what's happening in social media as well, because they may spend their time scrolling. Our opening passage in Hebrews grabs us with the idea that Jesus is God's voice and worthy of our attention. We immediately are shown Jesus Christ is the agent of God's revelation and far superior to Old Testament prophets. They were various servants of God with a message that was fragmentary and even incomplete. It came in pieces through visions, you know, dreams, events, and direct communication as men were ready and able to receive. But Jesus is the better voice, for he's the Son of God. So when we look at Hebrews 1 and 1 through 3, we see a glimpse really quick about who Jesus is. First, we can see that Jesus is the heir in verse 2. When we mention the term heir, what comes to your mind? For me, it kind of just stands out like the beneficiary, right? The one who's going to inherit at the death of whomever. So they are to become the possessor of the property, in a lot of cases, the right to be the executor of the estate, the right of authority even. Jesus as heir means that he is the rightful son. We aren't told here that our connection to this means, but we know it impacts us if we fast forward to verse 13. However, passages like Romans 8, 12 through 17 can kind of help fill in the gaps for us. We are adopted by God through Christ to become a joint heir with Christ. When you look at Romans 8, verses 12 through 17, therefore, brethren, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For as many are led by the Spirit of God, they are sons of God. For you did not receive the spirit of bondage again to fear, but you received the Spirit of adoption, of whom we cry out, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs. Heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, that we may also be glorified together. So we are adopted by God through Christ to become a joint heir with Christ. Next, we see that Jesus is the creator. When we look at verse 2, Jesus as creator is not subjected to creation. He existed before creation. John 1, 1 through 3, and verse 14 as well. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and he became his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Ephesians 1 says that God's plan to save man through his Son has and is the plan from the beginning. Looking at verse 4 and 5 of chapter 1, it says, "Just as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and without blame before him in love, having predestined us to adoption as sons of Jesus Christ to himself, according to the good pleasure of his will." Colossians 1:16, one more passage to kind of reiterate Jesus as the creator. "For by him all things were created, that are in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions, or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and by him and for him." Next, we see Jesus is the radiance in verse 3. The illustration could mean the radiance or beams of the sun in the sky is inseparable from the core of the sun. However, the beams grant us access to the light. Impossible to stare at the sun. But we know Jesus as radiance makes God approachable for humanity. This idea is going to be reiterated in subsequent lessons in our study of Hebrews. This is best also seen in the Transfiguration. We can pull from the Gospels, Mark 9 and verse 3. It says, "His clothes became shining, exceedingly white, like snow, such as no longer on earth can whiten them." We also see Jesus as the imprint. The illustration, Jesus as the imprint of Christ, can be seen in a king's signet ring as a sign or seal of authority. It can be illustrated in a coin that bears the image of the president or emperor, like from ancient Rome. It can be illustrated in a modern mold in a factory that makes the exact same product over and over. If you see the imprint, you see and know the original. You know the source. Jesus in character, in his thought and action, is exactly like the Father. 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 4 says, "In whose mind the God of this age has blinded, who do not believe, lest the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine on them." In Philippians 2 verse 6, it says, "Who, being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God." In Colossians 1:15, we see that it says, "He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation." Well, then we also see that Jesus is high priest in verse 3. Now, while priest is not explicitly stated in this verse, however, making purification for sins is kind of priestly language, especially when you look at the connotation that we see from the Old Testament. The high priest would go into the Holy of Holies once a year to make a purification for the sins of Israel, right, on the Day of Atonement. We can look at Exodus 30, verse 10. "And Aaron shall make atonement upon its horns once a year with the blood of the sin offering of atonement. Once a year he shall make atonement upon it throughout your generations." There it is.
I was going to say one more thing is in the book of John, 14th chapter, Philip, one of his disciples, asked him to show us the Father. And the answer was, "If you've seen me, you've seen the Father." I represent fully the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the Godhead while here on earth.
Yes, exactly, Roy. Thank you for that. So it's throughout Scripture like that. And the great thing about this Hebrew study is just how much it's like the children of Israel needed to be reminded. They were told, but they were a generation away. And here the author was really driving this point home, and we're going to see a lot of points reiterated once, and then he'll come back around and do it again. So it's important. You can tell something's important when somebody says it more than once. How many parents out here recognize that teaching ability, right, with our kids? We also see in Leviticus 16:30, reiterating the point of Jesus being the high priest. "For on that day the priest shall make atonement for you, to cleanse you, that you may be clean from all your sins before the Lord." It's important to understand the severity and foulness of sin. This can be illustrated by death and physical decay. We know that sin is death, and Christ as priest, he took care of sin for us. So purification is not just a cleansing here. It is both a cleansing, but it's also a payment for it. In other words, Jesus offers a superior cleansing, but he bought it with his violent death. And we know we can look at many passages. We'll fast forward and look at one from Hebrews 9, verse 12. Not with the blood of goats and calves, but with his own blood. He entered the most holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. How much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? We also see that Jesus is king, verses 3 and 4. Verse 4 identifies unique aspects of Jesus' kingship. He sat down. How many of you, when you think of a king, you think of them sitting up on a throne, and they're sitting from that throne at a high place? Well, that's exactly where Jesus is. It identifies for us that his work is complete. He is seated at the right hand of the Majesty on high, kind of a position as we might incur thinking of a king, a position of power. He's exalted above forever. None of the enemy's attacks on Jesus' kingship will prevail or touch his commanding position of power.
I was just thinking there, when it said on the right hand there, that's a place of honor. And then he tells us as his children, we're on the right side if we're the sheep and not the goats.
That's all right.
A lot of technical difficulties in there.
Thanks, sir. It's operator error.
Nope.
Yep, I knew it was.
No,
Our next passage, continuing in Hebrews chapter 1, is going to go from 4 and 14, and we get this question, why angels, right? So let's look at passage Hebrews 1, verses 4 through 14. For to which of the angels did he ever say, you are my son, today I have begotten you, and again, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. But when he again brings the firstborn into the world, he says, let all the angels of God worship him. And of the angels, he says, who makes his angels spirits and his ministers a flame of fire? But to the Son he says, your throne, O God, is forever and ever. A scepter of righteousness is the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated lawlessness. Therefore God, your God, has anointed you with oil of gladness more than your companions. And you, Lord, in the beginning laid the foundation of the earth. And the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. And they will all grow old like a garment. Like a cloak you will fold them up, and they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will not fail. But to which of the angels has he ever said, sit at my right hand, till I make your enemies your footstool? Are they not all ministering spirits, set forth to minister for those who will inherit salvation? So why angels? I'm going to get in the exact same location. I may have to. So why angels? The author of the book and Ben have kind of put some thoughts that kind of pose some ideas, perhaps. Hebrews 1, 4 through 14, we see that is a comparison of Jesus to whom? Angels. The Hebrew writer is making a case that Jesus is more than a messenger, an angel, or a servant of God. Rather, he is better. As we know him, he is the Son. But why? There may be at least three main possibilities, and we're going to look at least three possibilities. The Hebrews audience, did they worship angels? A practice to which Paul once alluded to in Colossians 2:18. Let no one cheat you of your reward, taking delight in false humility and worship of angels, intruding into those things which he has not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind. One issue with this theory is that if the Hebrews audience was in fact Jewish, which all signs point to this, then they would have been monotheistic, right? Only worshiping the one true God that we find in Deuteronomy 6:4. Therefore, while this, is mentioned, I don't think it's probable that the reason that the Hebrew writer begins this conversation by comparing those two, Jesus with angels. Another idea, which is one until looking at the author of this book's mention of it, I never would have thought about, is that angels are mentioned with the covenant. Looking at the story surrounding the covenant, the one that was extended to Moses, we can look at Deuteronomy 33 in verse 2, and Acts chapter 7:53, and Galatians 3:19, and then Hebrews 2:2. And if Jesus can be represented as better than the angels, if we go along with this idea that potentially that angels were the mediator with the covenant, then if the author would pose that the case of this covenant mediated by Jesus is better than that. So if you kind of go along with that idea, then you would have to swap over and say your loyalty is with Jesus, if that was your appeal. But looking at Deuteronomy 33 to verse 2, we can see that angels were definitely in that, and they were part of it. So it says, and he said, the Lord came from Sinai and dawned on them from Seir. He shone forth from Mount Paran, and he came with 10,000 of saints. From his right hand came a fiery law for them. Acts 7:53, who have received the law of the direction of angels and have not kept it. Galatians 3:19, what purpose then does the law serve? It was added because of transgressions till the seed should come to whom the promise was made, and it was appointed through what? Angels by the hand of a mediator. So they were kind of serving as a mediator. Now, I don't pretend and won't try to elaborate further tonight on how that was an instrument and how they were a mediator, but merely trying to capture that angels served in a capacity with the old covenant as a mediator. Hebrews 2:2 says, for if the word spoken through angels proved steadfast, and every transgression and disobedience received a just reward. And then this last theory, which I think I'll definitely agree of the three, probably makes the most sense to me, is that the author proposes that our resource, and I think that it is the strongest, is not an issue of whether or not we promoted angels in Colossians 2:18, but it's a demotion of Jesus' status as son. So the angels held a place, right? But they liken Jesus in that place as an angel. And that's not where he is. And so the distinction here is if they believe that Jesus was not truly the Son of God and they liken him just as simply an angel, which, there's other passages that give us a depiction of who angels are, then he was proudly stating that Jesus is far above an angel.
Well, you read a while ago where he created everything in heaven and earth, so he created angels, he has to be bigger.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, Roy. So, and that's going to be kind of the culmination at the end, kind of looking at what all do we get from our look at the comparison between Jesus and these angels, and one of which is exactly right. And because he was there in the beginning, and he was part of creation, and angels are a created being, he's superior to them in that sense. So, let's understand some of the source of quotations. There's several Old Testament passages drawn in this collection. Verse 5, we have Psalms 2:7 that draws our attention to the resurrection event. The honorific title of son is vested with a royal meaning. So Psalms 2:7 says, I will declare the decree, the Lord has said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Another that we capture from verse 5 is 2 Samuel chapter 7, 12 and 13. The context is that there will be a king from David's line that will rule forever. And there we have the Son's supremacy. 2 Samuel 7:14 says, I will be his father, and he shall be my son. If he commits iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men and with the blows of the sons of men. That's an easy passage we can go to, right, as fathers with our children, right? There's another one that Morris Carruthers highlighted proudly in my Bible from Proverbs 23 and 13. I'll leave that for you to look at. But the Lord God said that he would even chasten his son if he was out of line, right? But verse 6, we have another passage, Deuteronomy 32 and 43. It says, Jesus is worthy of worship as opposed to angels. He is equal with God. So verse 43 in Deuteronomy 32 says, Rejoice, O Gentiles, with his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants and render vengeance to his adversaries. He will provide atonement for his land and his people. In Psalms 104 and verse 4, when we're looking at verse 7 in that first chapter, angels serve as hired hands. The Son shares a close intimacy with the Father. Psalms 104:4 says, Who makes his angels spirits, his ministers a flame of fire. And in verse 8 and 9, we got the reference to Psalms 45:6 and 7, where we see that Jesus is the only legitimate fulfillment of this psalm and heir of David's throne. Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. A scepter of righteousness is the scepter of our kingdom. You love righteousness and hate wickedness. Therefore God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness more than your companions. Verse 10 through 12, we have a reference to Psalms 102, 25, and through 27, where Jesus has both an eternal existence and an eternal throne. He's going to exist when heaven and earth pass away. Psalms 102, 25 through 27 says, Of old you laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will endure. Yes, they will all grow old like a garment, like a cloak. You will change them, and they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will have no end. In verse 13, we have a reference to Psalms 110, verse 1. Jesus claims fulfillment of his psalm himself. He is the King of kings. In Psalms 110:1, the Lord said to my Lord, Sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. So what is the meaning of the discussion when we look at Hebrews 1, 4 through 14? Well, we can see in verse 5 that Jesus' name is greater, and that's because he is the Son. We can see in verse 6 that Jesus' dignity is greater, for he is to be worshiped. And then looking at 7 through 12, Jesus' nature is just simply greater. He is eternal and never-ending. And then in verses 13 through 14, Jesus' position is greater, for he is at God's right hand. I know that's kind of been more of a lecture type lesson. I appreciate those that comment. I appreciate everybody's support, and it's kind of as Adam mentioned, I was kind of nervous coming up here. I do appreciate the opportunity. It's a great opportunity for me to grow as a Christian, to study, and like I said, I am purely a Bible student. But I'll try and work on being able to engage everyone in more questions. But any questions or comments as we close? Yes, sir, Mr. Steve. Right. Yeah, I can't help but think, trying to look at their time frame is, these were Christians, they were Jews, but they had become Christians and accepted Jesus as Lord, but now they're a generation removed, right? And we see in other texts where they were confused about what was going to be the return of Jesus and what that was going to look like. And Jesus hasn't returned in the form and what they were expecting. And so being a generation removed, and as you say, it wasn't like they had everything written down and it was everything just being talked about. And so they were questioning their faith, is what it looks like to me, and their understanding of who Jesus was. And here we have in our opening chapter immediately being hit with, hey, this is what you need to hear. Everything that I'm telling you about who Jesus is, he's far superior. And we've already started off all the ways that he's superior to angels. And we're going to leave angels, and we ain't going to talk no more about them until like the last 2 chapters of Hebrews. But he devotes a whole section in his first chapter just comparing Jesus to angels. And then we're going to see how he gets compared to priests and prophets, and just simply the covenants, and how Jesus plugs in with the new covenant and how far superior that is to the old. But
I was going to make one point about the angels. Even though they're might and everything, and they minister to God, but that last verse says in verse 14, are they not all ministers sent forth to minister to those who will inherit salvation? They minister to us.
yes,
Now, I don't know all the ways they do that, and I don't want to elaborate on that, but I know one thing. When a righteous person dies, he's carried by angels to Abraham's bosom.
bosom.
So, they minister to God and they minister to us.
Yep. I think a good study would be just to look at angels by themselves. I know I would benefit from it, but because like you say, Roy, it's like, how they play a part as being the mediator with the old covenant. I just never had seen that, looking at that text and even seeing how the angels were playing a part in that. But you get the simple comparison in that one little passage there on how Jesus, even early on, we're seeing where he is compared to angels and as a mediator with the new covenant. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. And this study, I'll speak for myself. We being a part of the church, and we place or say Jesus is in a certain place, but is he in that certain place? And so hopefully through our study looking at Hebrews, if we can drop ourselves to even where these Hebrews were, and recognize too that we need to have a healthy respect of where Jesus rightfully should be. So, all right, thank y'all for your comments.